Hello and welcome to the Power Tools for Coalitions webinar. I'm Kinkini Banerjee and I'm so glad to have you join us for this session. This series, the Power Tools series, is organized as part of USBC's training, technical assistance, and capacity building support for our network of both our coalitions as well as our national member organizations. And the access is free and open to all interested coalition leaders, members, breastfeeding practitioners, advocates, activists, anyone involved in forming or leading a nonprofit organization in the breastfeeding maternal child health field. And the announcement emails are sent through USBC's coalition announcement list. And this series occurs on the third Wednesdays of odd-numbered months from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern. And for streamlining, getting some background sounds, I'm going to... thank you. This series occurs on the third Wednesdays, and to streamline access, the webinars have been set up in a series fashion. So once you're registered for even one session, you're automatically on our mailing list and you get all the announcements, the reminders, as well as a follow-up email that tells you the link to where you can find the archived recording of all of these. So if the topic and speaker details are usually posted or sent out a week or two before each session, and you could also find them on our website at www.usbreastfeeding.org/power-tools. And we also disseminate all the session details in our Coalition Learning Connection. And we know that it's hard for folks in the middle of a workday to attend these sessions live. So the access is free. Two, we always record these so you can watch them at your convenience. So when you get your registration email, the link that's in the follow-up email or the registration email usually also takes you directly to our page. And in case you want to know how to do it, I can show you on our website. As you go to our website, you'll see the tabs across the top. The last tab is the one for coalitions. Click on that. You'll see a drop-down menu appear. Click on the Power Tools webinar, and it'll take you to the handouts for today's sessions, as well as for all our previous session recordings and materials. We are in listen-only mode, which means that you can hear us, but we can't hear you. We still want this session to be as interactive as possible, so please submit your questions. We will keep about 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of the presentation, but send us your questions as they come up for you during the session. And if you haven't done that before, I can show you how to do it. On the right side of your screen, you should see a control panel. If you don't see it, it might be minimized. Just click on that orange tab with the white arrow and it'll pop the control panel out. And go through the different tabs, and just under the audio tab is the one for questions. If you click on that, it'll expand the tab and give you a text box to type your questions in. If you have any audio or other technical issues during this session, please email coalitions@usbreastfeeding.org, and our staff should be able to assist you. And that brings me to today's topic, understanding and leveraging the significance of newsletter in the social media age. As you've known, in our Power Tools series, we've done a number of trainings on social media and how to use Twitter and how to use Facebook. And this session is really to emphasize that in our age of social media, you should not be underestimating the power of emails. Emails are still a very strong ally in the branding, fundraising, and advocacy work our organizations do. Social media gets a lot of attention, and rightly so, but the significance of social media does not undermine the significance of newsletters. During this webinar, we will explore the advantages of newsletters and how your organization can leverage those advantages to cultivate, support, and rally the interests of your supporters. We will hear about the many creative guidelines of the whys and hows of e-newsletters and how we can utilize it to inform, engage, and build new partnerships. I'm delighted to introduce our presenter, Lynette Anvalika Enigbo. I'm going to mute one of the lines here. Lynette is a member of the USBC staff team and is the development and evaluation coordinator. We are so thrilled to have Lynette present today, and many of you know her. Lynette, she's a social media maven and has presented on previous Power Tools webinar. Lynette provides group trainings as well as one-on-one trainings to coalition members, leaders, and other USBC stakeholders, and we are very lucky to have her skills and expertise at USBC. Lynette attended the Indiana University for both her undergrad degree in religious studies, African and African American diaspora studies, and also she got her graduate degree from the School of Public and Environmental Affairs. She has experience managing social media, as I've said, graphic design, marketing, and advocacy, and is very passionate about helping women find the information and support they need to thrive, informed by her own experiences as an undergraduate mother and advocate for maternal academic retainment and positive child development. Lynette has recently transitioned to her new role, focusing on enhancing USBC's development and fundraising capacity, and she will also be closely involved in guiding USBC's evaluation efforts of our programs. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lynette. Welcome, Lynette.
Thank you, Kinkini, for that wonderful introduction. Again, my name is Lynette Enigbo, and I am really excited to be presenting on the importance of social media on the importance of newsletters in the social media age. I worked on the newsletter for USBC for the past 3 years, and I recently transitioned that over to Sarah. And so right now is a really interesting time for me to really reflect on the ways in which working with social media and newsletters at the same time for the past 3 years really helped me understand the strengths of each of those platforms. And I think, I still do a lot with social media, and most of you, if you've ever been on any other webinar that I presented, it's always very social media heavy. And being someone that's a big proponent of social media, it's really important for me to take a step back and also talk about the importance of email, but specifically newsletter today, for being really part of your communication toolbox. As coalitions and as nonprofits, I think we really have to use every single tool in our toolbox. And part of being able to make communication manageable is understanding the strengths of each of those tools so that you can really begin to identify what am I trying to accomplish and which of the tools in this toolbox can help me accomplish those things. And it might mean using more than one, using one in a different way, but you really have to familiarize yourself with those tools and how they work together for you to even begin to make those sort of decisions. So I'm really excited to present to you today on the importance of newsletters in the social media age. So I think we want to start with the biggest reason that newsletters still matter. And it's going to be really obvious because people are still checking their email. I think that, you know, with the movements in technology, with the birth and death of so many social media platforms, it's kind of easy to feel like everything is shifting and changing. But with email is a pretty consistent source of information for people. And everyone is checking their email. So when we think about social media, when we talk about social media, when I train on social media, you really have to understand who you're reaching on each platform. So, you know, Facebook tends to have an older demographic. Snapchat is a much younger demographic and personality type. Twitter and Instagram are a little bit in between. So each demographic, depending on your demographic, you pick the social media platform that goes along with it to a certain extent. That's not true for email. You know, you can say that, you know, a 16-year-old might not use Facebook, but they definitely check their email. You know, a 70-year-old might not use Snapchat, but they definitely check their email, right? So it is a platform that spans generations. And that's really important for us as we're considering making our messages, making our communication plans manageable and effective, right? And so, yeah, we'll stop there for that one because I want to talk about this. The changing algorithms make it really difficult to consistently reach your audience on social media. So one of the harsh truths, even as someone who consistently is talking about how amazing social media is, it's really important for those of us who are constantly pushing its importance to be honest about what it can and cannot do, and to know that yes, we see it. It's not a panacea. It is not a cure-all. So one thing that's happened is that during the beginning of a lot of these platforms like Twitter and Facebook, nonprofits were really at the helm of getting people to sign up for them because they're constantly saying, follow us on these platforms because they saw the value in it. So nonprofits definitely did their part in helping to build the prevalence of these social media platforms across generations, right? So, I mean, I think nonprofits can really be credited with the demographic that's on Facebook right now, right? Because you constantly were hearing, hey, follow us, follow us, follow us. And you figure, well, you know, everyone seems to be doing this. Let me follow and see what it's about. But the rub is that in order for these platforms to make money, they're really making money off of ad sales. So that means that it's increasingly becoming really, really difficult to have what we refer to as organic growth because they want you to buy the ads, right? So when you buy the ads, it's much more likely that the people that you're trying to reach will see it. So even if you've spent the last 10 years trying to build your follower number, depending on the algorithm, it's not guaranteed that the person that's seeing everyone that follows you is definitely going to see your posts. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't still post on Facebook or Twitter because like I said, social media is relevant. It's really important and you should absolutely do it, but you have to understand what you're doing and why. And so that's why it's important to me to be really honest about what's really happening on these platforms. So the lesson from this for, I think, us in the nonprofit field, and for us specifically on this call, is to do not neglect your listserv and your website because you don't have to pay anyone to advertise or advertise. You don't have to pay for ads on your own listserv. You can put whatever you want out there. And it's your audience and you are in full control of when you reach them and how. And that's not something that social media any of the platforms really are gonna offer you. So that is very important to consider as you are, you should spend as much time trying to grow your newsletter as you do your social media followers. So go ahead and add the little email button next to it so you can follow us on Facebook. You can sign up for our newsletter. That's going to be a long-term benefit to your organization. And, you know, in addition, I think one thing that I didn't say in the first slide is thinking about just the realities of communicating with each individual person on social media versus your emails. So, you know, if you are using social media, you know that each platform has different algorithms, but they also have very unique ways of communicating, which is why it varies so much based on demographic. So if you want to post anything on Instagram, you have to have a picture, right? That's not true for either of the other platforms. And then Twitter has a character count that's much lower than any of the other platforms, even with their recent increase. So if you're trying to schedule posts, or if you have a bucket of things that you want to post, you have to be really careful about what goes where. You can't really, everything needs some type of adaptation before you put it on a specific platform. And that takes time, and that takes additional resources, right? And so there are some messages that you just might not get to do that for. But when you're thinking about email, whether someone has a Yahoo account or an iCloud account or a Gmail account, it really doesn't matter. They're going to get the message that you send them. The most you have to worry about is if it's going into spam. But it's not, you know, the algorithms are not so complex that it takes a really deep knowledge of analytics or like the changings of the algorithms in social media land to get your message across. And so that's another important thing to keep in mind. Newsletters allow you to test what's working because there are fewer algorithms to muddle the results. And in this increasingly data-driven society, a lot of the newsletter platforms, even the free ones, give you pretty straightforward analytics dashboards that can be used to create what we call KPIs, or key performance indicators. Now, what's great about KPIs is they help you make decisions, right? And so it's not necessarily that the data is just going to say, don't use this headline anymore. You know, it's going to say, you know, this headline works a lot better, or the A/B testing showed these things. And then you as an individual, knowing all the things that the computer doesn't know, you synthesize that information, then it can help you make decisions. But I think this is really important because when you're thinking about the benefits of email, it's important that you recognize the ease in which you can gather data from the email, and that, you know, the data really does mean a little bit more off that than when you're looking at social media. Because, you know, if you tweet something at 8 o'clock or at 7 o'clock in the morning, and someone doesn't check their email or doesn't check Twitter until 7 o'clock in the evening, chances are they're not going to see that tweet, right? But if you email them at 7 o'clock in the morning and they don't get to email until 7 o'clock at night, that email is going to be there, and they're going to see it. Even if they see it just to delete it, you know that they probably saw this email, right? So when you're looking at likes, you can say, okay, well, this post had 2 likes, and then you have to figure out, well, is it because of the time of day? You know, how many people actually saw it? There, you know, like what are the Twitter analytics dashboard telling me? You have to do a lot more processing than when you're looking at email. If you're looking at email and you do an A/B test, and an A/B test is when you split your email in half and you send out one with one headline and one with another, and then you compare to see if there's a difference in open rates or something. And so if there's a drastic difference in open rates, they saw your emails, you know, it's a little easier to confidently conclude that one headline really did perform better than the other one. And it's not a matter of something that you haven't factored in, right? There are less sort of factors to contend for. So you can get some really meaningful data out of there that can also be applied to your social media and your website, which is really helpful. So it's that great go-between where you can scale up for your website, or actually even just put it on your website, because newsletters do allow for more content, or you can scale down a little bit to put it on social media. So that's another thing that I really like about newsletters. Again, so newsletters are a lot better for content-rich posts because even with the saving capacities that are being included into the social media platforms. So if you've noticed, a lot of them have the ability to save a post. You can save a post on Facebook and on Instagram now. But it's still a lot easier to save, organize, and return to content in your inbox than in any of these social media platforms. If you've ever saved anything on Facebook, you know that you can save it and then you'll think, well, where do I even go to get that email? Or to get that post that I can, look at it again. And, it's much less likely that you'll actually do that versus in your inbox. We're just used to that. There are a lot of different ways that you can organize your inbox or return it to being unread so it stands out to you. You can search your inbox for keywords and find things that you liked. So you don't even really have to organize it. It just saves there. And that's huge because, when we're thinking about people having a time crunch and we're really trying to get their attention, it's really better, it's in our best interest to make it as easy for them to consume the content when they have the time and the space and the energy to, right? And the newsletters, emails in general, but newsletters really give us that ability, really give them that ability. So newsletters are also great for closing the inspiration to action loop because of their deliverability and because of their capacity for richer content. So the inspiration to action loop refers to the time between someone being inspired to take an action and then they actually taking it. So this is something that brands think about a lot. They want to get you excited about their product and have you purchase it as fast as possible. And, I think that while we're not necessarily selling anything in the same sense that an Anthropologie might be selling something, we are creating content for consumption, and we do want some action, even if it's we want them reading more things to be more inspired or more informed. We want them taking action. We want them to, please donate, please send this to your friend. And so we might not consider ourselves in sales, but we really do, we do want an action, the same way that Anthropologie wants you to buy something. And so we should really work on thinking about how we can make it easier for people to get from inspiration to action. And so newsletters are great for that. One other reason that they're actually really great for that when you're considering and comparing and thinking about the tools in your toolbox is that social media is meant to scroll really fast, right? So it's like the idea of endless scroll. There is no end. And because of that, you consistently want to get to the next thing, right? So you're kind of like in a shopping mall going from store to store. And that social media is set up like that for quick interactions, but email isn't. And so it actually makes it easier to navigate away. When you're on social media, you really, even if you don't realize it, you pause a little bit before you navigate away. Because suppose you've scrolled for 15 minutes in Twitter and then you navigate away and then you have to begin to scroll again, right? And so even if you don't conceptualize in that way, those platforms really do want you to stay because their goal in terms of their business model is for you to like consume as much as possible on their platform so that they can sell ads, right? And so we have to really think about the ways in which what's actually happening, even if we don't really realize it. And a lot of this is available for us to learn about the techniques that these businesses, specifically social media, are using to make themselves profitable. And they're really good at it. And so it takes for us, we have to really think about what can we do to coexist in this space and make things work for us, and recognize when something really isn't going to work for us, and see what other platforms we can use. If used correctly, newsletters make your urgent emails even more noticeable. And I don't know if I've said something else was my favorite, but this is something that I really love about newsletters, because it makes a huge difference for me personally. So a lot of the newsletters that I receive have the exact same header, right? And so if I sign up for a newsletter for an organization and it has the exact same header, I begin to expect that email, and I know, okay, this seems to come weekly, it seems to come monthly. Okay, I know it, and when I see the header, I know what it is, and I can say I'll wait for that later, or I'll keep it. But now, if I'm expecting that email and they send me something else, then it signals in my brain that something must be happening. Like if something in the headline is about legislation, then I know that this must be something urgent. There must be something really important happening around this, or they wouldn't send it to me, right? So from the organizational standpoint, it allows you to be more judicious about the other emails that you send, right? So it can help you support positive expectations for non-newsletter updates, because people begin to say, well, they seem to really be good about only using non-newsletter emails when they need to. And then that's positive association, then I'm more likely to open your non-newsletter emails. So that's something that, and I also think it just takes a lot of the angst and the guesswork out of, gosh, this is really cool, should we send it? If you don't have a newsletter at all, then I mean, there's so many cool things that happen. I'm sure that there is a lot of that. Sort of, wow, like, how should we send this to the people and make sure that they get it? So definitely using nonprofits as part of your email toolbox, even just considering, if you're doing a campaign and you can build in your newsletter schedule into your campaign schedule and use your newsletter to support your campaign, right? And people are expecting that email, and when they get it, they're more likely to open it because they expect it. So even if they don't want to see an email that's just for fundraising, and they can tell from the title it's just fundraising, and they're like, well, I don't have that much money, so I'll just skip it, and then I won't feel bad that I didn't donate, they're probably going to still open your newsletter, because it's not just a donation solicitation. It's not just an advocacy. It's not one thing. It's like a box of surprises. You don't really know what's going to be in there. And if you gain that positive association of like, I know whatever is in here is going to be valuable, then it's great. And it becomes a really strong tool in your communication toolkit. Yeah. And so we are going to go in and we're going to take some time really looking at how organizations are using newsletters. So organizations use newsletters to inspire, inform, and add value to the inboxes of their subscribers. So that's why I'm really quick to say it's really not one size fits all. I think this is a general inspire, inform, and add value is a broad overview, but it really gets at what are you trying to accomplish? I think a lot of times people feel like what content needs to be in the newsletter. And it's not really about the specifics of the content. It's really about figuring out what do you want to accomplish with this? And when you start with a base of I would like to inspire, inform, and add value, then you are going to consistently produce things that people want to look at, that people want to be engaged with, regardless of the topic being covered. I think that there are so many, I'm 100% sure that we are constantly inundated with so much information, with so much content, that people are a lot more judicious in thinking about, well, what is going to add value for myself? And so one thing that I didn't mention earlier in the slides that I do want to talk about is when we think about the interplay between newsletters and social media, what social media has done is sort of say, okay, now I can follow a broad range of issues and topics on social media. So I can follow something I'm incredibly interested in and maybe put on an alert so every time they tweet, I hear it. Maybe not, because that's a lot. But you know, you have that option. But you can also kind of test the waters with new brands, new concepts, new ideas, new people, influencers, whatever that is. A like, a follow is actually pretty non-committal on most platforms. I mean, I think, you know, there are some considerations when you get deep in the weeds of social media in terms of how likely someone is to follow you on each platform based on the culture of the platform. But really, it's a much lower bar, right? Versus a newsletter. And when someone subscribes to your newsletter, they are coming a little closer into your sphere in terms of saying, I'm really interested in this. I'm really interested in this, and I'm giving you permission to contact me whenever you would like to contact me, right? You can send an email at 4 o'clock in the morning. You cannot call anyone at 4 o'clock in the morning. And sure, you can tweet at 4 o'clock in the morning, but it's probably gonna get lost. You know, like there's another layer of interest happening when someone signs up to your newsletter. So really, you should be walking into your newsletter with the confidence that this person is interested, right? They already see value in us. They already see some value in this newsletter. So I don't say this to make you feel like, oh gosh, now we have to figure out how to add value. What you do is valuable, and the person that subscribes thinks that your topic, your coalition is valuable. So now it's just a matter of staying on brand and walking in that confidence. So newsletters that are primarily to inform are still really relevant. And I really want to talk about this because it's important in our field, especially because there's so much policy that happens. But I think that when you talk about and think about how much emphasis is put on images and videos, and also the amount of resources it takes to do that, I think, you know, we can definitely talk about ways to do it more effectively and efficiently, but there's a learning curve, right? And so thinking about using text-heavy newsletters and sort of understanding that, you know, text or copy is not dead. You know, email's not dead, copy's not dead. If anything, the social media makes copy even more important. Because you only have X amount of characters, so it needs to be good, right? So the first one I actually want to look at in terms of how organizations are using email is this example from UNICEF. So if we look at this, and I pulled it up, it caught my attention because it talks about the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative, but it starts with a huge image, right, which is kind of you know, this is what we need nowadays. You got to have an image. You have to have quality images. But really, when you look at the email, the majority of it is text. And so what newsletters like this tend to do is synthesize information. It gives you a summary, and then it allows you to read more. This is a really important email type to make sure that you're having in your inbox, because you really get an idea of the length. So a lot of times we say you want it short, you want it, you know, not too short, but not too long, really. And, you know, that doesn't mean anything. So what you really want it long enough to convey your idea, but short enough to make it clear that you are very clear about what you're saying. You know, I think sometimes using extra words just muddles the idea. So what you really want to do is say, I'm clear, and here is a clear communication of what that is. And that's what these short blurbs really allow you to communicate. And in a field like ours, newsletters like this are really, really significant. And it's not, so, you know, here, this one uses some pretty basic block imagery and graphics that I think are pretty replicable without it being so time consuming that the opportunity cost is too much to do a newsletter like this. And so this is a newsletter example that I really like from UNICEF. And there are some things that you can tell just are just missing, right? So when I'm looking at this, things that stand out to me is that there isn't a donation button here at all, right? So UNICEF is not using this opportunity to ask for donations, and then the social media buttons are at the bottom. And a lot of times in newsletters, those feature much more prominently somewhere at the top, right? And so those are some things that I just thinking about when I open an email, I'm constantly thinking about the email and why certain decisions might have been made and what that communicates to me, right? And part of gathering data and is like constantly thinking, you are a person too, like another company would ask you your opinion. So think about, what am I thinking as I'm going through this? Have someone else look at it and have them tell you what stands out. What do you notice? What do you like? What don't you like? And those sort of things really start to help you tap into what are people thinking when they're opening emails, which is going to be important for you as you are creating them. So next example I want to look at is our email at the USBC. So this is another text heavy email. We actually don't use any images in ours. And so one of the things that you can think about when you're looking at ours is ours also doesn't have a donation button. That just is always there. And when you're looking at it, let me point that out in the UNICEF one. When you're looking at the UNICEF one, when you're looking at the UNICEF email, it's not linked the same way that ours is. So at the bottom is where you would find out more. But as you're reading through, it's not going to say, okay, well, this is the award, and if you click here, it's going to take you to more information specifically about that award, right? So these are some other things in terms of just presentation and guides that you want to think about. Can you do both, right? It might not be an either or, but just looking at how do different organizations present the information? What do they want you to do? So all of these links really go to the UNICEF website, but our newsletter is a lot different. So we link things specifically. We link the title of reports specifically. If we have a action, we link that specifically, and it takes you to that person's page. Or if it's something with ours, it takes you to ours. But there isn't really there isn't really a way that, when you're using buttons, it says take action here, or like donate here, and that's not what's happening here. And that it's not an either or, right? It's not, and that's why recipes for success with newsletters really just don't really make that much sense, because you really need to think about, what does your organization do? What space do you hold? What space do you want to hold? What do you expect from the people receiving your newsletter? And how do they interact with your newsletter? Ours is a national newsletter that is very much focused on the field. It's field heavy, and we have positioned ourselves to be curators and synthesizers. We analyze, we curate, we analyze, we communicate, right? And so when someone opens a USBC weekly email, they think, all right, well, the curation has been done for me. Like, this paragraph is going to tell me what I need to know. And because it's so relevant to the field, everything gets treated the same, right? So we believe that when someone opens this email, what's going to determine whether or not they read it is this headline, right? But more than likely, they're going to read the entire thing, because that's what it's designed for, and it works for us in this field. And so it's not to say that it's going to work for everyone, or that it's like, you have to create the newsletter that works for you, and there is no design right or wrong. It's really just about making sure that you understand what your newsletter is doing and doing it the best way possible for your organization, for the people receiving your email. So another consideration. I wanted to, maybe I should pull up the slide before we go into the example. My slides are, it's a little slow. So the next example that I want to talk about is this Oxfam example that I feel does a really great job of storytelling. It has a variety of actions available. It renews hope, makes a vision attainable, and is really content rich yet digestible, which is also true of the last two newsletters that we looked at. And you could look at sort of the way that font and color and spacing are used. And so those are the things that go off in my brain in terms of like containing information in a space so that it makes it more visually digestible. So then therefore it's a little easier to actually consume the information because you're clear about where it begins and ends, and everything has a space. So even though there's a lot of content, everything has a space for itself. It doesn't feel crowded or overwhelming. So let's take a look at this Oxfam. And, you know, I recall this story at the beginning, you know, almost perfectly. So it really starts off with a water engineer talking about how he took 500,000 pounds in a suitcase to Ethiopia during the famine. And so he talks about how, okay, we did this because we really needed to. There was an urgent need, but now we would not take your money in a suitcase. We would deliver it digitally. We would, you know, circulate money back into the economy and restore the dignity of the people in these areas so they can, you know, spend money as they need to. And this is such a powerful story for me. I actually signed up for the Oxfam newsletters. I'm just gonna put that out there because I was so deeply impressed with this story. It communicated so much about the organization, communicated that they've been around for a long time, that they keep people around for a long time. So he worked there for a pretty long time. But when you're looking through, there's such a wide variety of things that you can do. And it's also, they use the buttons and it's all very clear, you know, a short paragraph on why you might want to do it and then do it. And that's part of that, thinking about that inspiration to action loop. One of the things that stood out to me was thinking, you know, global poverty is this huge issue and they've been around for such a long time. And someone that's a little cynical might be like, well, why should I keep donating to you? It's been 75 years, like problems still exist. And that happens with nonprofits, right? We're tackling these huge problems and we have to really think about burnout and why someone should keep having faith that we're going to be able to do this. And this is a amazing, quick thing that's like, extreme poverty has been halved in the last 15 years. I mean, that is so powerful, just that one sentence. Like, did you know? But, you know, and I think that they really did an amazing job with this email. So really want to lift it up. But this is about coalitions, and I would be remiss if I didn't do coalition specific examples of what coalitions are doing to make newsletters work. And so I have a great example from the Michigan Breastfeeding Network. And same, it informs, inspires, variety of actions, is heavily local and personal for the people in Michigan. And that goes back to this idea of having your niche and knowing your niche. And no one else is going to be doing what you're doing specifically. And so when we're looking at the Michigan Breastfeeding Network's newsletter, we can see that it is definitely local. You know, they really talk about, there's a section on the Spartans. I scrolled up too fast. So we're talking about Michigan State University, right? And this is going to mean something to a lot of people within Michigan, even if they didn't go to the university, because that's the state university. And we all know, you know, football games, it matters. It's part of the fabric of your state. And so you can see that they do such an amazing job of giving so many opportunities to get engaged with the organization, to really understand what they're doing, how they're doing it, why they're doing it. I think, you know, this breastfeeding and child custody Story Collector really stands out to me as them really, you can see they're really paying attention to what's happening in the news, because doing the social media, I've come across a lot of those stories of breastfeeding and child custody, and they really took that and jumped on the opportunity to do a Story Collector because it's relevant to women, because it's relevant to what's happening. And those things aren't lost in terms of thinking about creating value and expectancy and a brand, and that those positive associations with what your newsletter does. And so here's another great one. You can fill out this form. It's a WooFoo form. And they'll congratulate the new IBCLCs, and that, like, you are part of this, like, it's a dialogue. And so when even thinking about, social media did not invent sharing, right? So I might say, oh my goodness, my friend just became an IBCLC. I'm gonna email her and surprise her with this, or I'm gonna send it to her and tell her, oh, look, this thing is happening. Maybe you should submit yourself. There's things that it's shareable, it's engaging, it's personal. And so really huge shout out to Michigan Breastfeeding Network for their amazing newsletter. I also want to talk about the California WIC Association newsletter. This is another incredible newsletter. As you can see, we were talking about it, and I had Kinkini forward it over to me, and that just, right, because it's shareable and it's searchable, so she was able to search it and forward one over to me. And this is a newsletter, now that I'm not doing the social media, or now that I'm not doing the newsletter, thinking back to the emails that I used to get when newsletter forwarded to me, this was one of the ones that really pops in my head in terms of synthesizing information. I think that they go upstream to connect breastfeeding to other social determinants of health, right? And that is huge, right? So I can rely on them to talk about things like budget. Is there going to be a shutdown? Is there going to be a continuing resolution? What does that even mean for breastfeeding? What does that mean for child health? What does that mean for WIC? These are things that they do, and I have come to associate these things with them. And there's a positive association with, even if I don't, even if it's confusing, right? Even if you're like, well, I still don't really understand this, that they're keeping an eye on it, and there is so much value in that. And so I really want to bring up this newsletter as another one to definitely subscribe to see how coalitions and organizations are using their newsletter to create positive association and add value. A few other great things I want to point out about this newsletter is things like this Amazon Smile button. So when we're thinking about adding value, one of the ways that we add value is by doing some of the steps, making it as easy as possible for you to get inspired and then act. And Amazon Smile is something that you might think, I should really do that a lot of times, but it gets lost in the muddle. We are all doing a lot of things. And what we subconsciously or consciously do in this, information age is figure out what can we do and what can't we do. And in certain ways, we outsource the rest. And part of newsletters is actually a type of outsourcing, to say, I do not have time to figure out what all the cool new things in Mommy Land are. So I'm gonna subscribe to the Mother Mag newsletter, and they're gonna tell me cool things in Mommy Land and introduce me to cool concepts. So like, I cannot possibly keep track of everything that's happening in terms of budget in Congress. Like, this is beyond what I can do on a daily basis. And you subscribe to this newsletter and they help you do it. But apart from that, when it comes to actions like, Amazon Smile or tweets or maybe, attending events, what you really rely on is to make it as easy as possible to do that. And so there's simple things that you can think about, like adding things that people consistently need to do and making it as easy for them as possible. So if there are 7 steps in it, you want to do 5 if possible, so that there's only 2 for them to do. And that is the value add, right? That's part of the value add that you're providing for them. That's part of the reason they're going to continue to subscribe to your newsletter. Even simple things like thinking about, you know, sometimes when I get an invite to an event, and they're like, you know, come to our event, but there isn't an easy way to add it to my iCal, my iCalendar, or any type of calendar on my phone or computer. That makes it a lot harder for me to attend the event, actually, because I'm probably gonna forget. I can't just put it in my calendar and set an alarm, right? So really, you know, start with yourself. Think about what things make it easier for you to do things, and then go that step. Go through, if you get this email, how easy is it for me to do Amazon Smile? What can I do to make it easier for people to do Amazon Smile? And so love these emails from the California WIC Association and the Michigan Breastfeeding Networks. Again, highly recommend that you subscribe to both of these. They're really amazing, valuable articles, really newsletters. So we're gonna go back. I think I decided not to toggle back and forth. So this next slide is about the California WIC Association. And I think, yeah, curates and presents national and state level legislation is a big thing. So just because you're state level doesn't mean that you can't do national stuff. You know, really, you just have to figure out what it is you're doing, why, and execute it well. You know, and we're gonna talk about that in these next slides, which is your coalition's newsletter. So newsletters come in a lot of form. Let your capacity guide your format and frequency. Format and frequency aren't going to determine the success of your newsletter. Your consistency and your quality do. And I am going to make a strong statement and say it is not better for you to be stressed out and your team to be stressed out trying to do a weekly newsletter than if it is better to do a bi-weekly or a monthly, and when you are stressed, when you are not stressed, you produce your best work, right? And you know, we're not going to continue this false notion that like stress produces results. It doesn't. We want you healthy. It is bad for your body. It's not worth it. You know, being able to consistently produce something that's quality, and I mean, even if it's a monthly newsletter that only has 4 items, as long as those 4 items are quality, as long as those 4 items add value, that is much better than even a monthly newsletter with 8 items because you feel like newsletters have to be long, right? It's not true. But also when you think about formats, just because you have a newsletter doesn't mean you have to have a 4-sentence paragraph for every single item. You can say, hey, this article from NPR about inequality in schools is amazing. Link. Boom. You know, I receive an email that is every 2 weeks and it's 10 things and it's bullet form. I mean, it's literally a list, 1 to 10. And he writes 1 or 2 sentences. Hey, this caught my eye. I love this picture. And it's literally just a link to the picture. And you open it and you're like, oh, that's a great picture. But that's all it is. And I love that email. And it's an interesting format to me as well, right? So just subscribing to a lot of different newsletters can help you break out of a mold of what you think a newsletter has to be. There is no has to be. It's really what works, what's cool, what's interesting. You know, it just free yourself from trying to adhere to you know, arbitrary notions of what a newsletter is. And so, yeah, you have enough content, yes, for a newsletter. You absolutely have enough content for a newsletter. And here are 4 things to consider when you're choosing the content, right? Some guidelines. Is this content on brand? Does it fall in line with what your supporters expect from your organization? And that doesn't mean that like you have to be super rigid, you know, like we've never posted something like this, so we can't post it. That's not what it is. It's just more like, how have you guys positioned yourself in a space, and does this content fit with that position? you know? And and so when you're thinking about that, it can, you know, that's a start point. I mean, you're like, okay, so how do we do this? You know, I'm not a brand enthusiast. I don't read all the books about branding like you, Lynette. So like what, like I need something else. What is up with this? What does that even really mean? And so there are other questions like, what do you want them to do with the content? Right? So you might say, you know, I think this is on brand. And then you ask yourself, what do you want them to do with this content? And like, even if it's just to read it and to know, I just want them to be informed by this. Okay, when you communicate this to them, how are you making it easier for them to take that action, right? And so if you think, oh, okay, well, I want them to read this and be informed by it, but I also want them to do this action that we have because of they're more informed, right? So going back to this example of thinking about doing the story collector. Now, Michigan could have said, well, we're gonna share this story. Let's say we need another article, we're running a little low. Let's share this story or some of these tweets that women have been tweeting about custody issues and breastfeeding. So we're gonna make a Storyfy, or we're just gonna link a few tweets. And then we're going to use a block, and then that block is going to say, share your story. And some women might say, I got this. I feel this so deeply. I don't need any convincing. I want to do the action. And then other women might say, I don't get why this is a thing now. Or like, what's going on? I'm curious. And they might go and look at it and understand, oh, okay, here's how it relates. Here's why it's relevant right now. Here's why they're putting it in. Right? It's on brand. This is the type of stuff that they do. I mean, that is obviously on brand, but I think that there are certain things that, you know, are might need a little bit more of finessing to help people make the connections. And I think, you know, that's one thing that the California WIC Association does really well, right? So when you're looking, you might be like, well, what does inequality in schools have to do with breastfeeding or with WIC? And it's like, well, you know, none of these things happen in isolation. So they really touch on everything that makes the ecosystem healthy for like child nutrition to occur, right? And so for families to thrive. And that can absolutely be your policy as an organization. And, you know, at USBC, we don't only do breastfeeding policy. We definitely talk about things like paid family leave, because those things matter. There is a very direct connection. And so when things are happening in your states, don't, you know, use it, talk about it, because you're attending to the entire person, right? And being able to do those sorts of things help people understand that that you see them more as a complete person. So even if you're focusing on this niche, you're not just ignoring, you know, it's not a blunt cut. I'll say it like that. You know, it's important to not have a blunt cut. And so we talked about, you know, making it simpler to do the action. And the last thing is, how does this email improve your receiver's connection to the organization or the cause? So if we think about the Michigan the Michigan Breastfeeding Network, they had that great, you know, welcome new IBCLCs. You could submit a story. You could sign up to get their clings. You know, there were so many things that weren't just Facebook or Instagram or like follow us. It was like a real connection, a dialogue. And those sorts of things are really important. And it's not necessarily that it has to be in that way. You know, don't forget to connect to broader ideas that support engagement, like avoiding advocacy burnout, right? You know, I think as nonprofits, we deal with it internally a lot, but you also have to consider that, you know, and we know this when we step out of working for a nonprofit and just walking down the street, there are a lot of nonprofits. There's a lot of everything. There are a lot of stores, there are a lot of grocery stores, there are a lot of like dog food places. Like there's just a lot of everything. And so part of what you really want to do is build the person's connection, not just to the cause, but to your organization specifically, right? And that's why it's organization, cause, that the two need to be working together. And I think one of the ways, especially if you're thinking, okay, well, I want a little bit more content, you know, I think that really talking about how people can avoid burnout is one thing. And thinking about, if you want people to attend an event, in terms of making it simpler for them to do that action, maybe sending out an article about like, how do you attend social events with anxiety? What about how do you present advocacy to your children, right? Because if we're a breastfeeding organization and we're asking women to be a part of it, how do they integrate advocacy with motherhood? What does that mean? What are some articles they can read? What maybe like a list of books that you can read to your child about advocacy? Which brings me to just sort of really understanding what can we do to help people. It's a shared goal, right? So what can we do to help people walk with us along to that shared goal? And what does that communicate about our support of them? Seeing a story about anxiety or improving or really helping mothers and fathers support advocacy in their role as parents, that signals a lot. Even if you don't have anxiety, it really says to the person receiving this email that there is space for you to have social anxiety and be a part of this organization. Not only are you welcome here, but we are actively working to understand what that means, right? So like advocacy for people with disabilities, like advocacy in terms of engaging with what happens to you as an individual. I think there's some really great articles I've come across that's talked about advocacy in terms of improving confidence and self-awareness. And I think that these are things, especially when you're talking to parents, wow, advocacy can improve the confidence of my child. These are things that might not scream breastfeeding, but are totally relevant because you are an advocacy organization, right? So using that adds so much value to when you send out your email, because you're really, you're thinking about, you're really, being innovative, you're being a disruptor, even if, it's not just about creating new, social media networks or being in tech. Those aren't the only disruptors. There's room for disruption in social change, in your newsletter. If you are the person that's supposed to be doing the newsletter, there's room there, and you should see yourself as part of this movement to make things better, make things more valuable, and really walk the walk of your organization, and with some pride and some confidence. And I think newsletters really let you do that, because people are going to actually see it, right? And it's not the constant, oh my goodness, I have to tweet every single day, and we need 3 Facebook posts a day, 15 tweets, and I have to just schedule it. It doesn't have that same, and I say that as someone that loves social media, but it doesn't have the same urgency in terms of it's a never ending loop. It's every week, and you can really slow down and, focus on thinking about, okay, let me put myself in someone else's shoes. Let me think about what I do when I open a newsletter. And I think if you really just focus on quality and consistency, you're gonna have an amazing newsletter, because really, you get newsletters all the time. You're constantly being advertised to, you're constantly being asked to do things to support causes. And so, between you and your team, you guys really do know what's going to be compelling to someone where you are. What type of events are going to be compelling? What type of messaging is going to be compelling? And, don't be afraid to use your newsletter as part of your box of tools to help you get across what it is that you want people to know about your organization, and help people to explore about themselves, right? And I think that is, focusing on the person receiving the email, thinking about yourself as someone that receives the email, just as much as an organization, just as much as what you or your organization is trying to accomplish, is really going to help you get to the goal, because then you can find those shared goals. And so I feel very passionately about that. So I will go on to the last slide, which is a few things not to forget that's going to make it make a big difference. So one is that the USPC has a free photo library bank of high quality images. And so if you have to choose between no image and a high quality image, choose no image. But you don't have to make that choice because we have this high, like no matter what, if you can't find a high quality image, we've got one for you. So I suggest you go in there and pick out the images that you really like. It's a gigantic bank of pictures. So go out and pick out like 15 or 20 when you have some time, when you're watching Netflix, put it in a separate file, save it in a shared box so you and your entire team can see it, and then you can use that to draw from. And you know, that photo library would make it really easy to do an email like the UNICEF one that we looked at, because you're going to have those high quality images straight off and you don't have to worry about that. Second thing, make sure that it formats properly for mobile devices. Part of the reason that email is also not going to die is because it is adaptable to changes in technology. So a lot of the platforms, you know, MailChimp, which is free, has this amazing tool where you can actually click and it will show you exactly what your email looks like on your tablet and on a phone. And so one of the things, you know, when we looked at the UNICEF email, for instance, one row had like 2 columns, right? And then the next one had 1 column, and then there was 2 columns. And so you might find that, you know, if there's a reason you put them side to side, if say you want like it's 2 columns, but it's really the same article, maybe in the program you're using, when it gets on a phone, it's going to separate those 2 columns because it's starting from the left and going all the way down and then going back up to the right and going all the way down. So now all of a sudden something that's right next to each other on a computer screen is an article apart on a phone. And I have seen that happen. It's not a good thing. Definitely just make sure to check to make sure that all of your images, words, buttons are in the correct place. There's no, sometimes you get an email or like this happens with websites a lot. It doesn't fit into the frame of your phone and you're like scrolling over, or there's like a pop-up, but you're only getting the top corner and you're trying to press the X. Really frustrating. The world is increasingly mobile. Make sure make sure the things that you send out are mobile device friendly because it makes a huge difference for people. Last thing, don't forget to leverage social media and your website to grow your list, but specifically social media, because otherwise you're really just building their platform, you know, and website too. You're really just building Twitter and Facebook, and you really don't forget to take care of home. You know, no matter how much I love social media, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you about the realities of it. You do not control Facebook or Instagram. They are businesses, just the same as MailChimp is. And you wouldn't grow MailChimp's mail list without growing your own, you know? And so please, please, please do not forget to use those to build your own listservs. And I do want to just one more suggestion that is something that nonprofits, I went to a conference and they were talking about how nonprofits don't really do gated content. And so I wanted to give the example, if you do decide to do something, I gave an example of maybe having a list of books about advocacy you can read about children's books about advocacy. You can have something like that as gated content where someone wants that file, and in order for them to get it, they just give you their website, right? And so if you're thinking about, gosh, how do I grow our listserv, those are 2 things to really think about. Advertising it in other places, even putting it in your newsletter. It might seem silly, but if someone forwards it to someone, then they don't even have to they don't even have to go to your website. They can literally just use that email that was forwarded to them to sign up for your newsletter. So just thinking through those sorts of things, I would be happy to think through, talk through some of these things with you. I'm available. And so the next part is questions, and I'm really excited to hear your questions. Please ask me whatever it is that you like, even if it wasn't covered. If I don't know, I'll just say I don't know, and maybe we can email about it. There's no shame in not knowing. I'm not opposed to trying to find out. So with that being said, questions.
Well, thank you so much, Lynette. What a fantastic presentation. And I have spent many years writing e-newsletters as well as print newsletters, and there was just so much new, fresh information that you shared. So thank you for that. We have a few questions. One of them is from someone who that they don't have a current newsletter, and they were like, do you have any suggestions? There are so many: Constant Contact, MailChimp. Are there any things that you would recommend for ease of use and ease of creation?
I'm a big fan of MailChimp. I think that MailChimp is a lot of, so MailChimp allows you to create a really beautiful newsletter really easily. And it also does a lot of the block, the UNICEF email looks like a MailChimp email because they make it really easy to do those blocks. You can literally just pick a template. So you can go in and say, I want a big block, and then the 2 columns, and then another big block, and that's a thing. And then you just drag and drop your pictures. And then, like I said, again, MailChimp will show you, okay, this is what it's gonna look like on a tablet. This is what it's gonna look like on an email. And because MailChimp was sort of built, platforms that are built by disruptors or sort of these like young millennial companies that, don't have desks or whatever that image is, it's one of those sorts of companies. And so what they're constantly, you can sign up for their newsletter and they're constantly trying to make sure that you know how to use it, right? So if they change something, they're gonna email you. And they're gonna make it, they are fashioning, companies like them fashion themselves after like an Apple or, Mac devices, which are really designed for you to just use it easily. Like you can't get into the back end of a Mac as easily as you can in a PC. And for some people that's horrible because they're like, well, I know all of my, computer things and I want to do the whatever thing. I don't know. I'm not a computer person, but I am. But MailChimp is kind of like that, where it's not as easy to break something, and they really want you to just easily use it and have they're really focused on the user experience because they understand that you just want a beautiful website or a beautiful newsletter. And so I would definitely start, and it's also free. So I think, Constant Contact does, you should look, when you look at both of them, just really think about where your newsletter is and where you want it to go. Most of the differences are going to be, you really want to check the analytics, what analytics it gives you. And you want to look to see, are you going to be able to have the newsletter you want it to have? How important is it to you that it looks a certain way? And that's going to be a big difference in Constant Contact versus MailChimp. But definitely make sure to pay attention to the analytics.
Great, thank you, Lynette. Another question, we have 2 questions. One is on data. You just mentioned analytics and how might you mentioned the key performance indicators and what do you, what are some things to keep in mind in terms of evaluation as funders want to know much more about what we are doing with their money and when we do a newsletter, when we put out a product like that, how do we measure how effective it is and how the reach is? So any info that you can give about using data in smart ways would be helpful.
Oh yeah. So I just became the development and evaluation coordinator. And so this is like the other side of things that I love besides social media, is really thinking about what matters in this age of so much data. And it all matters in different ways. So when you're thinking about data, something like the number of likes on a post is data, right? And what does it really tell you isn't as clear, but that information can be used in certain realms. So your number of likes means something to someone who wants to, like, if someone wants to use your platform to push out their message, the number of followers that you have matters, right? The number of people on your email subscription list matters, because it's a base. It's pretty easy to understand. But in those ways, you can use it as leverage, but it doesn't really tell you as much as people make it seem like it tells you. And that's where key performance indicators come in, right? Because, you know, something like the number of people on your list serve is data, and you can leverage that data. And so don't ignore it. But something like the open rate of your emails is actually going to tell you a whole lot more about how many people you're reaching, right? So your open rate is going to be a number that tells you, this is how many people you have on your listserv, this is how many people are actually opening your email, right? And open rates are terrible for most sectors, right? And so you also have to understand what is a good open rate. Because, you know, 22% is actually a really good open rate for certain sectors. And so really understanding what the data is telling you makes a big difference for when you're using data as leverage and when you're using data to really make decisions. And so that's why it's really important to understand key performance indicators, because, you know, something like the number of subscribers on your list, if you have 50 people unsubscribed and you're only focused on the number of subscriptions, that seems really terrible, right? But really, in terms of like things that really matter, if people aren't opening your email anyway, right? That messes with your inbox deliverability. But also, when they drop off, when they say, okay, I'm not opening this, so I'm going to take myself off this list, then that changes that calculation for open rate, and your open rate actually goes up, right? Because you have less people who are just letting it sit in your inbox, right? So it completely changes something like even the number of people that unsubscribe feels completely different when you're thinking about just like, I just need data. I need data to give it to someone. And that sometimes that's a thing, because you know, there's so much data that we're really trying to catch up to. What does it mean? You know, and even funders, sometimes they want the number of people on your list and they might not ask for open rate, you know, but you need to understand that what that means, so that even if you have a small number of people on your subscription list and they want that, but you know your open rate is 60%, then you say, okay, look, we might only have 3,000 people, but our open rate is 60%. So like industry average is 21%. So really you're getting about the same number of people from us, right? And when you really begin to understand that, then you can make sure that you're not being overlooked, and you can make better decisions, right? You can make better decisions and understand better what do they really want, and leverage the things that you need to leverage. So I hope that was a good example.
Great. No, thank you. That was, Lynette, and also the point that you made in the beginning that many of these come with the analytics as well. So it's not so it's easy for you to track and then kind of find out which ones really resonate with you, which ones that are the ones that you will be using. So thanks for that. The other question is, can you expand a little bit more about growing listservs and, you know, connecting to your, really having a kind of seamless plan where you're connecting your social media to link to your website and to your newsletter, and some ideas and strategies about that.
Yeah. So, you know, I think that one of the big lessons on Twitter is put everything everywhere. So, you know, the more you mess around on Twitter, the more you can see that really you can get to the same place a lot of different ways on Twitter. And the same should really be true when you're thinking about, you know, formatting your website and your newsletter and your social media. So all of this is really about user experience. One of the things, you know, it's a lot of websites, especially, again, there's like a MailChimp for websites, it's called Squarespace. And a lot of their templates will just, it's a plug and chug, and you can have it like on the top. So right on the top, you have all your social media, and you know, okay, check. So if I'm on my website, I need to make sure it's easy to get to my social media, and that it's easy to sign up for my newsletter. And these are things that people tend to check for at the top and the bottom of your social media and your newsletter. So you can just go in and say, okay, well, I'm gonna put this at the top, I'm gonna make it small so it doesn't get in the way of everything else, but it's there. And at the very end of my newsletter, you can sign up for the newsletter, you know, and I'm just gonna put the sign up button there, or put a button that heads me to the, that takes you to the website. But, you know, I think that the big thing that happens with these processes is really sitting down, and when you engage, you're constantly engaging with websites, you're constantly engaging with emails, and paying attention to your own user experience can really help you when you sit down to think about the things that you want to create. You know, Pinterest is really great for this. So website design, and there are entire, you know, small companies that are dedicated to figuring these things out, and they have newsletters. And I think so as we go forward as with USBC, you know, one thing that, you know, Danae and Kenny and I have been talking a lot about is really making sure that we help find all these things. So making that be part of our value add to you guys as coalitions, is saying, okay, so who are these companies? Like here, what all the listservs that you're looking into, Lynette, and how can we give that to you guys in a way that's manageable and not overwhelming, but really helps you begin to understand that, you know, right now we're in a space where a lot of people consider themselves content creators. A lot of the things that things like website design that people used to go to school for, a lot of people are just teaching themselves, especially, you know, user experience, user interface. You can teach yourself so many of these things. So it's really a matter of figuring out, is really getting into the mental space of knowing that you already have a base because you're constantly bombarded with this, and that there are resources out here for you to learn it. So there are no hard and fast rules in terms of making it integrate, but I think that, like I said, really understanding what each tool does makes it a lot easier to figure out what to put where and when. And it becomes, you know, if you use all of them, then you're not necessarily, like, for instance, if I say, okay, we're sending out this newsletter, we're not going to send you a reminder email. Put it on your calendar, follow us on social, or do you want a reminder email, or would you rather follow us on social media? And someone can click, right? And they can say, I want all the event reminder informations, even though I can put it on my iCal. But if they click that they want it on social media, you can have that trigger something that says, hey, don't forget to say that you're going to the event on Facebook so that you don't miss the updates. Don't forget to do this in Facebook so that you actually get our updates, so that the algorithm is nicer to us. Don't forget to add a notification on Twitter so that it comes through, right? Or add us to this list so that you can see it. So then you are supporting the user in using your platform in a way that works best for them. So rather than forcing everyone to get everything and then they unsubscribe, you kind of say, here, do you want the reminder email or not? And then it triggers an email. And this is, you know, which is funny, right? It's going to trigger an email to help them set it up so they still get your notifications. And you don't have to, you know, the onus isn't on you. That person walks away being like, hey, they really respect my inbox, right? And right. I think that that's it. Like, those are the things that make such a huge difference nowadays.
Thank you, Lynette. And just as Lynette said, you know, the USBC staff team here is in service. We understand that coalitions and so many of our network, members of our network, have full-time day jobs, and the work that you do, you bring your passion, you bring your expertise, you bring your dedication to the work of coalition completely as volunteers. So we want to make things support you in the work that you do, to highlight your work, to lift up the work of of your peers as well. So we also have something called breastfeeding in the news, because as Lynette said, we curate, we triage, we sift through so many newsletters every week, and a very small segment of them make it to the weekly wire. But there's a whole lot of really rich info that we triage, and if it's maternity care practice, we might put it in the maternity care practice learning community. If it's equity, we put it in the racial equity. If it's donor milk or formula marketing or paid leave, we put it in these specific learning communities and disseminate. But we also, if it's something that's relevant to all state coalitions, we put it on our coalition learning community, funding opportunities, new breakthrough papers, research, things happening, projects. So please feel free to use that content, copy, paste, use it to make your newsletter if that would help you. And again, Lynette is very, very great at conducting trainings for your coalitions to help you get set up as well. So thank you so much, Lynette, again, for a terrific presentation. And thank you to all of you that you do so much to improve the lives of women, children, and families. So this brings us to the end of today's session. I'm going to remind you to please complete the evaluation. We love to hear what you think about the sessions. We take your suggestions for future topics seriously. So give us your priorities and we'll make sure that we'll get you a topic that you're looking for. The work that we do is all about partnerships, coordination, and collaboration. And it is truly amazing what we can do when we all partner together. So until next time, thanks everybody. And thanks so much for all you do.
Thank you.